Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Love Over Fear. So we'll do this a couple times just to reiterate why we're doing this piece of content, why we are here. This is because we've just had so many questions come up about what is the role of love in sport, and for athletes, for coaches, what do we do with love? I think as a general rule, that's the overarching theme. How do we approach it? How do we work with it? How do we use it, understand it? And I'm here with Heidi. We're going to talk today about shared meaning. It's kind of going to be the topic. Mm-hmm. So where do you want to start with this one?
So I think this one, we talked a lot about self-love and defining that, and who's drawing the line of that self. Is it love, your higher self that's drawing that border for you, your boundary, your personal boundary, or is it actually fear that's setting that boundary? So Josh and I have been going through and reading a lot of this book called Crucial Conversations, and we're constantly trying to evolve and understand new ways to work through the work that is life. And it's really brought out a lot of pieces that we think could be so useful for this community, and coaches in particular. So coaches, especially at the high level, right? You have all these talented people. It's less about managing their skills and more about managing the people. And this is a beautiful way to open that context up and to bring in the practices from our community in a new way. Mm-hmm. So what do you think?
Well, what comes screaming through my mind is this notion that as athletes, as an athlete, I'll just speak for myself, I never understood that keeping information out of a conversation, out of an interaction, and information doesn't just mean words, right? Mm-hmm. It means thoughts, feelings. When we talk about self-love in the first episode, it's that understanding of who's driving, right? When we keep that kind of information from the people around us or from the moment, mm-hmm. maybe even separate the people, that affects how we show up. And that is such a giant indication that we're living from fear, that we're operating mm-hmm. from fear, that there's something in us that doesn't feel safe enough to share it, that doesn't feel whole enough. There's a lot of different places to go, but that's what comes up for me.
Right, and even if that fear is coming from inside,
right.
It may not be fear of the situation. Mm. It may be just, I haven't even looked down deep enough to realize this is something I can and should share.
Would you say that happens more often than not? It's more,
right.
I mean, sometimes.
We're not intentionally holding it out of the shared pool, right?
No.
So there's this concept of the shared pool of meaning. Yeah. And this has been a really big aha for us even this week. So we're just working through it with you. Things that are withheld from that shared pool of meaning are things that are so subtle and buried under layers and layers of nurture and expectation and past circumstances and situations that it takes really deep inner work to pull them out. So if you're going to show up wholly for your team, especially if you're a coach, and you're coming into that shared pool of meaning with these walls and these barriers built up, they're not going to open up to you because you're not opening up to them. Yeah. And that all starts with this line of self-love. And we want this border and this boundary of that self-love to be firm, but yet also transparent, right? Yeah. We want to be able to bring as much out and shine as much through that as we can. So when we bring it to the shared pool of meaning, the reason we talk about bringing these emotions up is we're trying to clear off all those blocks so that we can play our best, be in relationship in the best possible way.
And it's so this thought has been rattling in my brain so much lately, and I know we've talked about it, right? So there's relationship energy, right? There's mm-hmm. an energy between two people when they're in a relationship, but that relationship isn't just the personal one. So as athletes, we're in relationship with everybody around us. We're in relationship with our teammates, we're in relationship with our coaches, with our parents, with our families, with our friends. And when there's information that's not making its way to the surface and getting in the middle, every interaction we have is a sliver, right? Mm-hmm. It's a piece, and it's separate. It's separate from us. It's separate from what we're trying to do. It's usually disingenuous from what we're really wanting, right? Mm-hmm. And it usually comes out. How many times I can remember as a player having strong feelings come up and not understanding how to share that with a coach mm-hmm. or with my parents, with my friends. Stuff comes up and you don't know what to do with that. Right. And we don't associate that, number one, with not sharing it is an act of not loving myself in a very specific way, and that when we don't share it, we're limiting what our body's physically capable of.
Right, they definitely tie together. Yeah. So if we're omitting that, maybe consciously or unconsciously, it's going somewhere.
Yeah.
It's energy that is there.
Yes.
So if we don't share it, where did it go? Yeah. Well, it got stuffed down in your joint. So next time you take that hit, that joint pops.
Yeah.
I mean, this is some of the work of the other practitioners that we've had on the show recently, but that's what it is. This is how important those emotions are to our sport, is that is still kinetic energy that has to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And then the other piece you were talking about, that with the should I, the sharing is a form of self-love.
Yeah.
It's being whole. And if we're not showing up in our team, in our relationships as that whole person, we can never achieve that peak performance state, because the peak is so illusionary. We can't get to it if we're not whole. Yeah. Otherwise, you're just showing up with a piece of your pie. Yeah. And it overlaps with the coaching, but some of those barriers aren't ones that we think of. Society, our teammates themselves, what are our teammates' past experiences? Those things are brought into that shared pool or not brought into the shared pool. So last time we talked a little bit about the gradient, right? Yeah. There is a sense, a tangible feeling when one person is putting in more of their pie and the other person is putting in less. So if it's a coaching situation, a player may be opening up, doing this soul work, doing these things to shed off, showing up as their whole self. But if they're met with just a little bit of contact and a little bit of input from other people, it won't feel like a congruent match. Yeah. Talk to me about that.
Well, so there's a couple things that come up. Number one, that's when the separation starts, right? As an athlete in those moments, and we've seen this show up in life too, the separation starts building when you feel like you're not being either met with wholeness or showing up with wholeness, right? And it can be either one. So in the times when I've kept stuff out of our shared pool of meaning, when I've kept interactions and information from the shared pool of meaning I have with instructors, with students, what happens is slowly but surely you start to pull away, or you start to build up a wall. It's not even conscious. Like that's some of the work that I've been doing, is going, oh my gosh, these things that are barriers, I didn't even realize were happening, but they're very tangible, because you start feeling like if you're either showing up with everything and not getting it back, you're feeling like, I just keep exposing myself, why would I keep doing that? And if you're not showing up with all of it, you're feeling constantly like there's a mismatch, and that, right. I mean, that creates a barrier too.
So what you said about the piece of the pie, right? If we're each this circle, and when you know someone specifically in a specific context, say a teammate, say a coach, they know that little sliver of you, right? But of that sliver that they know of you, remember, when we perceive something, 80% of what we're perceiving is from our own mind anyway. Yeah. So we're letting them see 10% of us, and they're taking that 10% and only seeing 20% of it, right? And we wonder why there's not positive contact. So here, put your hands up. So we do this drill sometimes in our events, but if we're meeting right here and we have even pressure, even contact, this is like a vertical representation of our shared pool. But if one of us is pushing in this way and the other one is not receiving, so I'll fall forward, right? And that's what it's like when one person's pulling into the shared pool, but the other person isn't supporting or giving as much, right? So this
and that's where that exposed feeling comes from.
Right, and that often is the fear bit. So when that exposed feeling happens, it's vulnerability and it's fear, and then we do what? We put the walls on. And too many times of being vulnerable and not being met with that same level, we fall.
So let's talk about this in the context of real specific athletic performance, right? So I'll use an example from my experience. Like, I kept stuff from the pool of meaning around training the martial arts. I kept it from my instructors, and I kept it from my students and my partners, right? That
kept what? Kept like how you felt?
How I felt, so some of it was giant, like life questions that didn't make it, like how I felt about life and what we were doing. Sometimes it was, hey, this interaction with a student, I kept some of my personal, or I kept some of what I perceived from the pool. I felt certain things, but didn't bring them up because I was afraid of what would happen if I did. With instructors, same thing. slowly but surely, I started to develop a feeling like this isn't the right thing for me. Slowly but surely, I started to turn away. And I think a lot of athletes experience this, right? When we get burned by sport, I think when we get burnt out by sport, a lot of times it comes from we've kept stuff from the pool of meaning, and we just haven't allowed ourselves to open up and say, this is where I am today, and I'm going to be exposed and vulnerable.
So maybe totally off track here, but what I'm hearing is that you're saying, what if burnout isn't what happens to us?
Oh my gosh.
What if burnout is by not allowing those things to get into the pool of meaning, they burn us up inside.
100%.
And you know, we've talked about, I think we've talked about this in other areas, but when that thing that is kinetic energy doesn't come out and get shared, it can burn you up, and that could turn into, you know, burnout in the sport, burnout in the situation, the relationship, anything. So, 2 questions. 1, how do you catch that, and then change it, or you know, allow it to move into its next stage? And then 2, when we talk about bringing things to the shared pool of meaning, this doesn't mean you air your entire life and your entire life story and all the details in every situation. That's not what we're talking about. It's not the granulation. You don't need to spew your life in every situation, but it's the energetic, am I truly being whole? Am I giving my all in this situation? So that feeling of expansion. So 2 things. How do you notice when you're not expanding in a situation? And then how do you expand more in a situation and still be safe?
Yeah, so, and I do agree that I think it burns us up inside. I think every athlete that feels burned out is burned out because they haven't brought their shared pool meaning to the pool and haven't either given somebody a chance to meet them there or genuinely done that. So where it shows up, I think, or how you can notice is if, number 1, I think that's why this work is so important. Like I don't know if I have an answer for every athlete. I know for me, it's been stuff like tapping. It's been stuff like meditation, journaling, reading, giving myself new information and talking to people, like asking questions, trying to really say, this isn't matching what I want. If I'm an athlete and I'm going, I don't like training, that's a problem, right? Because it now all of a sudden to demonstrate self-love is pulling me away from maybe a goal that I thought I had.
Right.
So seeing that incongruence and saying there's clearly something I'm not understanding here, I need to recognize it, and using things that just expand our frame of reference and learning how to, I mean, there's so many things that come up, learning how to feel in our body where that shows up. I mean, learning how to feel what it, like when I don't bring something to the shared pool of meaning, I feel quiet. And I'm never quiet.
Silence.
I am silence. Like I turn to silence, right? I turn and I keep it all to myself. And that's this has been such a central thing, but it happens in all areas of my life. When I don't show a pull, I pull in. And it's so disingenuous to what I think, because I always have an opinion. I always have a thought. I always have a feeling. We all do.
So again, it's that gradation between where I think I am and how much more can I be sharing. And again, sharing doesn't always mean in words, but just energetically, am I walling off? Am I walling off? The courage to take off those walls is what allows us to play free, to flow free, to live in love, and to experience that self-love. And vulnerability.
Oh my gosh. Before we wrap this episode, the second question there was, how do we bring our shared meaning to the pool? And this is part of the work, right, is to learn how to communicate from a place of wholeness and authenticity without bringing your entire life story and without making it about something that the other person hasn't done or the situation hasn't done, right? It's about being able to say, this is what I'm feeling, and just owning it from that place and being able to communicate clearly, here's why I'm feeling this way, not because of these things that have happened, but because of what I'm seeing and feeling. This is where I am today. But I think getting very confident in saying, I'm feeling this, and opening without having that trepidation.
And being able to be present and to have presence in the present. So have presence in the presence. And that's the only way we can see through those walls.
Okay, we're gonna go a little bit longer because that was so beautiful, and it brought up for me in a simpler way, right? One of the things they talk about is this idea of mindful tinkering, and this idea of truly being present is the act of creation, right? It is, for an athlete, focus isn't about just being focused, it's about being present to the moment so that you can feel when you're not showing up whole, so that you can feel when things aren't matching what you internally feel like they should be, or when there's just a misperception there. That is the work of being present and being focused. That's why flow is so critical.
Right, exactly. You can only find that in the presence. And to learn more about getting in the present moment.
So connect with us, guys, in the Academy, number one. So if you haven't joined the Academy yet, go to theomniathlete.com/the-community. Check it out. And if you want to email us any questions, we want more questions for this show specifically. So you can email me directly, josh@theomniathlete.com, or support@theomniathlete.com. Email us your questions and we'll answer them in our next episode of Love Over Fear.